So I'm going to start with a little story that takes us to the mid-thousands in Silicon Valley. So there was a new bubble, a new boom. This time it wasn't the dot-com. This time it was about green and clean tech. And so there were some funds, including one started by one of our well-known eccentric billionaires from the UK, Richard Branson, a new green funds aimed at targeting the clean tech sector and this boom that was unfolding back then in Silicon Valley, the big new rush. What happened out of that? I think the executive summary is the bubble burst, and along with that, most of those funds burst as well. Now, I don't know, I haven't gotten a feeling like yet for what the audience is into and the different levels of like knowledge about impact investing or sustainable investing, and what it's actually about, what this word impact actually means, and we're gonna get into that. So I hope that we square for the different levels. If you're already a pro, bear with me. But so there's been a new boom in this space. And it's tough to avoid that impact and sustainability has hit the headlines, right? And this time it's different. Why is it different? It's become more profitable to be part of the solution than to be part of the problem. And this is a big deal because for those of us who are idealistic and pragmatic at the same time, I definitely count as one of those. This means that things can really move, right? Because a big part of the market which would otherwise not move, is moving, is ready to move. And so impact investing is going so mainstream. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I ran a company called Top Tier Impact. We are a global network of impact investors, impact entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders, like heads of sustainability at large energy companies, heads of impact investing in large banks. We're across 24 countries. We have several hundreds of members. We organize a lot of events like dinners, obviously everything virtually now, guys. We have working groups for all the main areas of impact, and we'll talk about what impact actually means, because I'm very well aware, being in this space and being contacted all the time by new investors entering the space, what does impact actually mean? That there's a lot of confusion on that. We also organize ourselves across specific targets and specific topics. So green infrastructure right now, right? Like this is a big topic, for example. So I'll tell you a few of the themes, and then we'll dive more into like this new paradigm. But out of C90, out of COVID, we are really seeing a huge interest in specific topics and specific like themes that are about how do we rebuild from here. And like we like to say, there's a road towards utopia and a road towards dystopia right now. And when it comes to the impact space, which before the crisis like was getting so much attention, a few of us like started thinking like, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now that the focus shifts, that everybody's in fear mode? And what we're seeing is record levels of activity. The space hasn't stopped. And if anything, there are a lot of economies coming up with plans for, clean energy transformations, like for various different things that like hit the spot across the space. Now, obviously not all economies, like some of them have politicians who are passionate about the past and not the future, but that's okay. And so we are really seeing like this movement like unfolding more than ever before. And so there are a couple of like topics that I want to touch upon, just like to make this an introduction like to the whole space. So before Top Tier Impact, like, why creating synergies? Why a network that is global? Like why these working groups? Why like putting together investors? And actually, we also invest, like why doing all of this? Because my background is in systems and governance. And so I actually got passionate about this sector when I started realizing a few things. Number one, I realized that because I've been an investor and an entrepreneur pretty much all of my career, and before, since being a little child, I've been quite entrepreneurial. I realized that I had been investing in areas that actually count as impact without knowing it. number one. And then the second thing is, I had to put together a few speeches, like couple of years ago, stepping back from running day-to-day a company of mine. And I looked at the system, like these speeches were related to system change and climate change. And I looked at the system and how the sort of like system architecture is flowing in the impact space. And I said, oh my goodness, someone has to do something about this. Why? Because the levels of excitement, education, sort of the levels of like the mainstream investment community, especially family offices where there's a generational change, like institutional funds, like the levels of wanting to shift to this sector were unparalleled, but huge confusion. What metrics to use? What does impact even mean? How do we connect in the ecosystem? And so I saw a system problem that I was deeply passionate about because of having realized that I kind of was in the space for quite a while. And I thought, well, how do we tackle this? But how do we tackle this in a way that is going to start delivering an impact right away, tomorrow, next week, next month, not maybe in 10 years? And so we put this together. And when it comes to systems, I mean, the other thing that surfaced for me at the time, like with these talks, was obviously our economic and political systems are not designed to deal with issues like climate change, like sustainability, with the urgency that we need today, right? This is very obvious. But when we think about this, it's just such a big like meta object. It's so complex, it's so annoying, it's so oppressing actually, that we just think, okay, well, what am I gonna do about that, right? Like, good luck approaching the political system. And so I think that's kind of like, that's part of the problem, and that's part of what makes it exciting. Because when you start breaking down a complex problem, you're always going to find first steps that you can take. And so this is like just to approach some of the issues that actually I think are part of the impact space right now, because it's about shifting the paradigm. It's about shifting the paradigm, like the way that we see our role in the impact ecosystem. We're here to accelerate the mainstream adoption of impact and sustainability as the way of running companies, as the way of investing companies, until we don't even need to talk about impact and sustainability anymore. I mean, for me, this is when they ask you those questions, like, what do you think in 5 years from now? They're going to say, like, this was outrageous, or in 10 years from now, whatever, animal slavery would be an easy one that I think. What I actually think for the impact space is that there should be no bad investing. Why do I even need to say impact investing? I mean, why are we still doing, why are we still activating investment areas that are part of the past and not the future? And this is starting to change a lot in this crisis. And we see it because we see this with, I see a question, what is impact investing? We'll get to that. And so, we kind of see, let me close this, a lot of movements in terms of huge institutions starting to have real regulation and real policies, like hitting them hard about like investing with the ESGs. So the ESGs are guidelines for sustainable investing as well, sustainable investing in public companies. And so it forces companies to like hit certain check boxes. And I'm saying check boxes because these are actually just check boxes. Like, it's better than nothing, but we need more than that, and more than that is coming already right now. There is a lot of regulation that is coming globally. The EU is about to implement a whole set of legislation around like impact investing and how, relating actually to how to invest more broadly, and is releasing like huge kind of funds programs, like incentive programs, like to really start making this sector the mainstream way of going about it. I can't speak to, for the US because it's a bit trickier, but the trend is there because impact investing is the fastest growing investment category. So what is impact investing? Like someone was asking before. I know that some of you are already familiar with it, probably still confused because you hear different definitions. Now, this is very important to be able to hold space for in a way, because the reality is that there is no one single definition of the impact space. Why am I not here telling you, here's my definition of the impact space, this is what it means? I don't want to do that because I think this is part of the problem. everybody wants to push their own respective definition of what impact investing is, right? So what I want to do with you guys today, actually, I want to tell you like the various ways in which impact investing is perceived, what it's meant to be about, and then you can take your own judgment call, right? I mean, I think this is what perspective taking is all about. So let's start with a very, very common framework for this space, which is the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. So the United Nations put out these SDGs, these goals. They cover 17 different areas, from health to the oceans to reforestation. So they cover all of these areas, and they're really about making sure that institutional investors and consumers can understand what the different kind of like areas are that need to be covered here. So the SDGs are by no means like the best way to think about the space, but they're a very pragmatic one because it's got adoption, and because right now, like what we're seeing also in our network of investors and in the ecosystem as a whole, is that there is a lot of kind of like, oh yeah, I'm the biggest fan of SDG number 3, like, oh no, I'm all about SDG number 5. And so it ties the personal interest element to understanding how that kind of investing works, right? So SDG number 3, for example, is health, right? And so you kind of start getting like a lot of metrics under that, like a lot of different definitions. You can dive deep into it. And if you're a fund that focuses on health, then you better understand what like that SDG is about, like whether you're kind of like focused on that or not. But it's just like a framework that is getting out there so much right now. So that is one that I wanted to mention to you guys before I go into actually like, I think what is exciting to think about for the impact space and why it's a new paradigm. I could tell you about many other frameworks out there. And what I can say is investors use them differently to measure impact, to measure like beyond the financial performance, to measure the impact performance based on their regions, based on their sectors, based on the maturity of the companies they invest in, and several other criteria. Now, what I want to talk about is actually the fact that in the impact investing space, early on, there was a very, very small fraction of investors who started already several years ago. They've built very big funds by now, who understood that there is no sacrificing profits in here. Why? Because these ultimately are some of the biggest investment opportunities of this decade and beyond. The world we're moving into, again, when I say we want to make the impact word redundant, that's the trend we're seeing anyway, right? Because I believe that in a few years from now, talking about like, oh yeah, we were investing in bad stuff and like all these tobacco stuff, and you know, that will be kind of crazy to think about. And we are already starting to see the early phases of that. And so there is a small part of investors in the market who understand that impact investing does not need to sacrifice projects. It's just not just about being nice or leveraging all the marketing hype that has now come with this sector just because it's been growing so much, right? Actually, this is about, so if you're a sustainability focused investor, really what you're thinking about are two things: resource efficiency or pollution control. So your companies are either achieving better resource efficiency, right? Like producing things and like offering services for less resources and counting them, or achieving better pollution control. Both of these, in their specific manifestations across sectors, are drivers of better business performance. And so we actually see a lot of our investors, especially the ones in private equity, so like, you know, after early stage investing in companies that would not exist anymore if they hadn't started being sustainable, because their costs did not afford or allow for them to waste resources like they were doing anymore, right? And so you see a lot of companies now, these are sectors like in the chemical space, in the industrial space, but really like, you know, things that like make up the fabric of like what we consume, what we build, what we eat. And so you start seeing this understanding going more mainstream. So moving from just a small part of investors understood this to a bigger part of investors. Thank you, Camille. Lovely. A bigger part of investors is starting to understand this. Now, what does this mean? Because obviously there's been a huge marketing hype and bubble around impact and sustainability investing. And this is also thanks to, people from many different areas, including teenagers like Greta Thunberg. One of our members at Top Tier Impact is the man who discovered and gave visibility to Greta Thunberg, her first speech at the United Nations and onwards. And so all of this coming together has given so much visibility to this, has put it on the top kind of like priority agenda of some of the biggest institutions. Like, I'll give you an example. I spoke at the World Economic Forum in early 2019, and impact, quite frankly, and sustainability were, yeah, sure, important, but more like, I'll say my PR speech and then go back to business as usual, right? Which I find extremely annoying. But earlier this year, so 2020, sustainability was the main theme of the World Economic Forum. And then the World Economic Forum reached out to us, to Top Tier Impact, to partner on their new SDG initiative. So SDG is, again, the United Nations goals for sustainability, to partner with us on their sustainability initiative, because it's become like so central to what they're doing. So the world has been changing already, right? But what's happened on the investment side is that you've got these understanding of, oh, okay, so impact investing, like great marketing potential of, hold on a second, actually, the returns look pretty amazing too. And, I don't want to say this and sound like some ruthless capitalist. I'd rather call myself a conscious capitalist. In fact, I don't think that capitalism is the best model at all. But again, I'm idealistic and pragmatic, so I'm adjusting to this reality until we can change it. And so, what we see is really this like educational shift in investors understanding this. And as this shift happens, so does the kind of like shift of even mainstream investors starting to make this a priority, like for their funds. And so we get so many kind of like people reaching out, like for membership or for to the network or for our investments. And we really see the uptake, and we really see not just the uptake, but we kind of see the shift in this mindset of like, okay, can you explain like what impact actually is about, to how can we get involved, like left, right, and center, right? So that's been changing a lot. We also see that there is a lot of need for harmonizing the space, because again, this definition is very confusing. That's still the case. And I do believe that if we can make a better job, if we can do a better job harmonizing it, then everything will move even faster. And to this point, I want to conclude so then I can take a few questions. I want to conclude with one thing on this that I care about, because I also have a background in the distributed system space. I've been in the blockchain industry for almost 8 years now, mostly because of my background in governance. It was like the perfect intersection of like governance, technology, finance. And so what we are seeing right now with impact education is embracing the understanding that there is no one size fits all model or metric system that works for everybody. So in other words, there is no going top down, abstracting everything, creating these simplistic like economic models or metric models and saying now everybody has to use that. This is why when I gave you the definition of impact, I didn't want to give you one definition of impact. I want you to understand beyond that and then, reason with that as you go about maybe discovering the space more. So what I'm saying with this is, and this will tie with distributed systems, is I believe that the way forward, and this is something that we're working on at the TTI Institute, so Top Tier Impact has an educational kind of like side, and we have a weekly newsletter, like you guys can subscribe. We summarize the main news in the impact space. But we are really seeing that the space is ready to be told that we're not going to go for like one top-down centralized approach, to saying this is right and wrong. We're going to move away. So this is the paradigm change. We're going to move away from saying there is one way to go about this, and I'm the dictator of this, and I'm saying that this is like how we should or should not do it. No, that is gone, right? And this is what we actually like really want to see. I certainly do. Where we can build systems and educational systems as well. So right now we're actually working on an impact qualification program for the sector, where we don't preach what we think is the right way to go about it. We educate the whole space, and we start building technology-based tools to use the right metrics flexibly, depending on the sector you're in. The way that this speaks to this new paradigm that I was telling you guys about is because I believe that more generally, if we can move towards a world that isn't run through central governance, so in other words, again, saying, okay, we are state X, and this is like our way to go about things, and this is like, this is the perfect governance model. When I was writing papers on governance, everybody always wanted to ask, what's the best governance system out there? And I found that question very confusing, because to me, there is no perfect or good or bad governance systems. Like, governance systems are a unique reflection of the culture and the values of each nation, of each society. And so if we try to build a world where we eradicate all of that, like what happens? What happens is that we lose diversity, we lose the consensus, we lose innovation, we have nothing left to gain with that. And if you look at nature, if you look at evolution, like, distribution is the way to go. Our DNA is distributed, right? You can scratch and get a copy of that. There are endless examples in nature of how evolution, and evolution is all about efficiency, has gone about it in a distributed way. And, I know that we're going kind of far out there with this, but that is ultimately why I'm so interested in the blockchain space since quite a while, and why I think that in the impact space as well, to embrace this way of thinking, right? Which I gave a speech a few days ago on spiral dynamics by Claire Graves, which is a model of evolution for society that is kind of, it goes from the initial stage of survival, I need to survive, I need to feed myself, all the way to the, the more evolved, so to say, states. And the more evolved states actually have this unique understanding of where everybody else is in their evolution stages. Because in these evolution stages, nobody knows where they're at. Everybody thinks they're right or wrong. Everybody thinks we're going to abstract to our way of going about this top down, and everybody should abide by that. But when you go beyond that, right, when you go to this new level, you understand that reality is a lot of shades of gray, a hell of a lot of shades of gray. And who are you to say what's the best way to go about things? So to me, that's a new paradigm. To me, this distributed way of thinking should really be infused across all our industries. We're definitely looking at that happening across the many industries that our members at Top Tier Hub cover. And if anything, before I take questions, I see that there's a few coming up. I hope that maybe I can leave you with that thought to think about how can this distributed way of going about things apply to what I'm doing or my industry. And yes, hello.
Hi, Alessandra. Alessandra?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's been a long time.
How are you?
Very good. Lots to catch up on. I really appreciated your comprehensive yet succinct overview of what's cooking, because it's very complicated. And it was very much to the point and hard hitting, as I would expect. And can we talk just a touch about what's going on in impact private equity? Blackstone, TPG. When I think about Blackstone impact, TPG impact, it doesn't naturally fit unless they've got some brilliant people and they're changing their DNA. Wonder what you're thinking about who in PE who's writing big checks is for real, if any. I'm not sure. And I've worked with both of them for a while.
Sure. Yeah. So I used to work in private equity at Blackstone. And what I think is, so number one, Blackstone is real good at raising money. Number two, Blackstone knows what it's doing. Number three, Blackstone might think, okay, there is an opportunity, again, from a growth perspective, there is an opportunity. That's all good. You know, that's all good, right? Like, again, we don't need to go into it for only from a specific angle. Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, we'll wrap it up. Awesome. We don't need to go into this from any kind of like specific or preachy angle. But I do believe that the teams being built are being built in you know, like Blackstone, TPG, are being built with quality, are being built in a way that, right, actually keeps in mind what impact is all about, and like is, you know, on top of it. Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Chris. Anyone else? I guess we have 2 minutes. Trying to see some of the questions. Also, yeah. If you, by the way, if you want to ask the question, come on and just like unmute yourself. Like, you can do that, like Chris just did. People are lazy by nature. How are you going to make them want to change? Very good question. So I think, so these would take much longer. So I'm going to try to give the 1 minute version, which will be incomplete. There is a lot of peer pressure going on right now because the ball has started to roll. And when the ball is rolling, it's kind of like, are you rolling with this? Or are you one of those people who just don't get it? And I know that this is not necessarily like the perfect way to go about it. Like, trust me, I don't believe that. But there is a lot of that going on. And what happens with that is that education comes with it, right? And when education comes with it, you've suddenly got people realizing why this is so important. So whether people are lazy or not, this hits everybody. On this note, guys, I will wrap up. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I wish that I could go through all of this here. Find me. Our website is toptierimpact.com. I'm Alessandra Sollberger. You can find me on Instagram, Alessaberg, or on LinkedIn. My name is very, very long, but hopefully you can see it here on Zoom. And yeah, thanks everybody for this.